reach for them when we're tired, stressed, or chasing focus. Bright cans promising instant energy, sharper thinking, and longer nights. But behind the buzzwords and bold flavors, energy drinks hide a more complex truth. Doses of caffeine high enough to affect your heart, sugar loads that exceed daily limits, and added ingredients that sound scientific but often do little. In this video, we'll dive into what's really inside these drinks, how they affect your body and brain, and why health experts are raising alarms, especially for kids, teens, and anyone mixing them with alcohol. We'll break down the marketing myths, the science, and the risks that don't show up on the label, so you can decide if the energy you're buying is really worth the price. It's easy to forget how recently energy drinks entered our lives, how quickly they moved from niche shelves in gyms and gas stations to the backpacks of high school students, the desks of office workers, and the hands of athletes, gamers, and night shift nurses alike, becoming not just a product, but a cultural shorthand for performance, intensity, and pushing past limits. A way to signal that rest can wait, that there's always one more hour to give, one more task to finish. Born from a mix of soft drink marketing and pharmaceutical chemistry, these drinks rose to global popularity in the early 2000s with slogans that promised transformation. Not just stimulation, but focus, clarity, speed. And while caffeine had been part of human routines for centuries, energy drinks reframed it, packaged it with lightning bolts, metallic cans, and neon colors, branding it as something powerful, edgy, and almost futuristic. But underneath the packaging was always caffeine. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. The same stimulant found in coffee, tea, chocolate, and soda, but delivered here in concentrated doses that, in many cases, exceeded what health authorities recommend for a single serving, especially when consumed quickly or by people more vulnerable to its effects, like adolescents or individuals with pre-existing heart conditions. And unlike coffee, which is usually sipped and self-limiting by its bitter taste, energy drinks are often carbonated, flavored, and chilled to be consumed fast, masking the sharpness of the caffeine with sugar or artificial sweeteners, creating the perfect storm for overconsumption, especially when you don't realize how much you've had until your heart is racing, your hands are shaking, and sleep feels like something your body no longer remembers how to do. At the neurological level, caffeine works by blocking adenosine, a chemical that tells your brain you're tired, creating a temporary sense of wakefulness, alertness, even euphoria, but once it wears off, the adenosine comes flooding back, which is why the crash hits hard, why the energy feels borrowed rather than built, and why the cycle of fatigue and stimulation begins to loop again. And while one energy drink won't harm most healthy adults, repeated use, especially in combination with other stimulants or during adolescence when the brain and cardiovascular system are still developing, raises concerns that go far beyond feeling jittery, with studies linking high intake to elevated blood pressure, irregular heart rhythms, insomnia, anxiety, and even in rare cases, sudden cardiac events in otherwise young and healthy individuals. So even in this early look, before we factor in sugar, additives, or other ingredients, we're already dealing with a product that asks your body to perform under chemical pressure, to push a little harder for a little longer. And while that may feel like productivity in the moment, the real question is what toll it takes when the buzz wears off. And if caffeine is the engine behind energy drinks, then sugar is often the fuel, a dense, fast-burning source of calories that gives the body a brief spike of energy, followed by an all-too-familiar crash. And while we've come to expect sweetness in soft drinks, the levels found in many energy drinks reach a point that moves beyond taste and into risk, with a single can sometimes exceeding the total daily sugar limit recommended by the World Health Organization. For adults, that means more than 25 grams. For children, even less. Yet popular brands regularly offer 30, 40, even 50 grams in a single serving, especially in larger cans, which turns what seems like a casual habit into a steady stream of excess, linked not only to weight gain and dental decay, but to insulin resistance, liver stress, and the long-term risk of developing type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, particularly in younger people whose consumption often begins in adolescence. And for those trying to avoid sugar altogether, the sugar-free alternatives offer a different set of trade-offs, using artificial sweeteners like sucralose, aspartame, or acesulfame potassium to preserve flavor without the calories, a move that may seem like a healthier choice, but opens another conversation, one less about immediate risk and more about long-term uncertainty, as research into how these compounds affect the gut microbiome, metabolic regulation, and appetite signaling continues to evolve with findings that are often murky, inconclusive, or quietly unsettling. Because while sweeteners may reduce the caloric burden, they may also alter how our bodies process glucose, how our brains respond to sweetness, and how our gut bacteria adapt to the presence of compounds they were never designed to digest, raising questions not just about weight, but about the deeper balance of hormones and microbes that help regulate energy, mood, and digestion in ways we are only beginning to understand. And so, the simple act of grabbing an energy drink becomes anything but simple. A choice shaped by taste and convenience, but shadowed by a cascade of biological responses, some obvious, like the sugar high or the caffeine buzz, and others hidden, unfolding quietly inside the body over weeks, months, or years. As the systems we depend on to regulate energy and health absorb the impact of ingredients we barely notice. But what makes energy drinks more complex than coffee or soda isn't just the caffeine or sugar. It's the mix of compounds that come with them. The so-called active ingredients listed on the can in bold scientific terms that sound powerful, precise, and reassuring, even when their effects are far less clear than the packaging implies. And it's in that long list of secondary ingredients. The taurine, the glucuronolactone, the B vitamins, the L-carnitine, the Panax ginseng, and the guaraná, that energy drinks begin to blur the line between nutrition, pharmacology, and pure marketing, drawing from the language of science not always to inform, but to impress, to build the sense that what's inside the can isn't just energy, but engineered enhancement. These compounds, while often naturally occurring or synthesized from common dietary sources, are rarely added in doses that have been proven to create meaningful effects, at least not the kind advertised. And while taurine, for example, plays a role in cardiovascular and neurological function, its supplementation in energy drinks offers little evidence of added benefit, particularly when paired with caffeine, which tends to dominate the body's response and overshadow any subtle effects from other ingredients. Glucuronolactone, another common additive, is a glucose derivative naturally produced by the liver and sometimes promoted as a detoxifying agent, yet despite its frequent appearance on labels, there is no strong clinical backing for its benefits in energy drinks, and its real function in the mix seems to be more about completing a formula that looks, on paper, more complex, more engineered, more scientific than a simple can of sweetened caffeine. The same can be said of L-carnitine, a compound involved in energy metabolism and often marketed as a fat burner or endurance booster. Claims that, when examined closely, tend to rest on limited or inconclusive studies, usually conducted in conditions far removed from the casual context of grabbing a can between classes, workouts, or work shifts. And then there's ginseng and guarana, two plant-based ingredients borrowed from traditional medicine and often presented as natural, cognitive-enhancing, or vitality-boosting agents, a branding strategy that leans heavily on their exotic origins and ancient use. While the actual dosages included in most commercial drinks are typically too low to produce any significant effect, especially when combined with other stimulants that dominate the body's immediate reaction. Together, these ingredients form what could be called a symbolic formula. A list designed to convey that the drink is more than just sugar and caffeine, that it's functional, smart, even therapeutic, when in reality, their presence often serves a psychological function more than a physiological one, offering reassurance to the consumer and legitimacy to the brand without delivering anything beyond the buzz of caffeine and the flavor of sweetened water. And this matters, not just because consumers are often unaware of the real effects, or lack thereof, but because the cumulative impact of ingesting so many compounds at once, especially in young or sensitive individuals, remains understudied, underregulated, and often poorly understood as health authorities struggle to keep up with a market that evolves faster than the science needed to evaluate it. So while the branding may suggest precision, the truth is that most energy drinks are a cocktail of caffeine, sugar, and claims. A blend that gives us the impression of control and performance, while the real outcomes depend far more on dosage, context, and individual vulnerability than most consumers ever realize. The effects of energy drinks aren't the same for everyone, and while a healthy adult might tolerate the occasional can with little consequence, the risks climb sharply when it comes to more vulnerable groups, particularly teenagers, children, pregnant individuals, and anyone with underlying heart conditions, where even moderate doses of caffeine can disrupt sleep cycles, increase anxiety, or trigger dangerous arrhythmias. Despite the warnings, energy drinks have become deeply popular among young people, often marketed with bright colors, extreme sports sponsorships, and a rebellious edge that frames them less like a beverage and more like a lifestyle. an image that masks how little research has been done on the long-term effects of repeated exposure during adolescence, when the brain and cardiovascular system are still developing and more sensitive to stimulants. Health agencies in multiple countries have already flagged concerns, some recommending age restrictions, others calling for clearer labeling or outright bans in schools. But regulation remains inconsistent, and the drinks remain widely available, often consumed in large quantities and sometimes mixed with other stimulants, or worse, with alcohol, a combination that creates a far more dangerous effect than many realize. Because when a stimulant like caffeine is mixed with a depressant like alcohol, the body receives conflicting signals, one telling it to speed up, the other to slow down. And that disconnect can lead to reduced perception of intoxication, increased risk-taking, and in extreme cases, severe dehydration or cardiac stress, especially during long nights of partying, where awareness fades long before the damage begins. And as the drinks continue to grow in popularity, the question isn't just whether they work, it's who they're affecting most, and what happens when the people most drawn to them are also the ones least protected by regulation or information. By now, it's clear that energy drinks are more than just beverages. They're symbols of a wider cultural rhythm, one that values productivity over rest, alertness over balance, and performance over long-term health, a rhythm that so many of us have come to internalize without noticing, reaching for a can not just to wake up, but to keep up, to push through, to do just a little more than our bodies were built to sustain. And in that context, it becomes harder to separate the drink from what it represents. Not just chemically, but socially. A product that tells us energy is something you can buy, borrow, or hack, rather than something your body builds, protects, and sometimes needs to preserve. The ingredients on the label may be legal, widely available, and generally safe in small amounts. But the larger story they're part of, the one that encourages more, faster, harder, comes with a cost we don't always feel until it's already been paid. Not in a single can, but over weeks and years of quietly asking our bodies to run without pause. And while the science around energy drinks is still developing, with some studies showing minor benefits in physical performance or concentration, and others raising red flags about heart health, sleep, and mental well-being. What's clear is that their rise has outpaced the research, their marketing has outpaced the evidence, and their presence in everyday life has outpaced the caution they may deserve. Which doesn't mean they need to be banned, demonized, or feared, but it does mean we need to ask harder questions, not just about what's in them, but about why we're so drawn to them, and what kind of energy we really want to be living on. Because maybe the real issue with energy drinks isn't just the caffeine or the sugar, or the additives whose names we can't quite pronounce. Maybe it's the idea they sell us, that fatigue is a flaw, that rest is weakness, that the only acceptable pace is the one we can't sustain. We live in a world that pushes us to stay alert, stay competitive, stay productive. And in that world, it's easy to see energy as a commodity, something we can extract, amplify, control. But our bodies weren't built for permanent acceleration. They were built for rhythms, for rising and falling, for effort and recovery, for energy that isn't borrowed, but earned. So the next time you reach for a can, maybe the question isn't just, does this work? But why do I need it? Because the answer to that might say more about us and the world we've built than any label ever could. And in the end, the most powerful kind of energy might not come in a drink at all, but in knowing when to stop,